Hello everyone, welcome to Sabbath School Gems, where each week we showcase key concepts from this week's Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School lesson. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sabbath School Gems. This is Lesson 10 for the fourth quarter for Sabbath, December 4, 2021, and it's titled, Remember, Do Not Forget, from the quarterly Present Truth in Deuteronomy. Now the memory text comes from Deuteronomy 9:7, and it says, Remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness. From the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place, you have been rebellious against the Lord. Now the author is not going through Deuteronomy in order, as you can see. He's just picking topics. And this topic of remembrance, I think, is a vital topic. There's other places that we'll see in Deuteronomy that talk about remembrance, and it's very relevant to Deuteronomy. So we are going to explore this gem, not quite like the lesson does, but we're going to hit some points in the lesson and also some that aren't in the lesson. Now, let's read the memory text again. Remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness. From the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place, you have been rebellious against the Lord. And the context of this is Moses is giving the final instructions for when they come into the promised land, and he wants to make sure that they remember that they are not so great, that they were rebellious and stiff-necked even from the very beginning, and it's only because of God that led them in there, because God stuck by his promise. He stuck by his oath, and that's why he led them in there, not because they were so great. Because remember, when Moses was on the mountain and getting the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant, they were already making the golden calf at the very same time that he was getting those tablets that were written by the hand of God. I think what he's saying is just remember that you have been stiff-necked all along, and remember they didn't even want to go out to the mountain and go up to the mountain and listen to God directly. They said, Moses, you go up there, we'll stay here, we're too afraid. So just from the very beginning, they were rejecting. You know, we have this idea, and I think I might have mentioned this in previous gems, but we have this idea that the children of Israel somehow, you know, they accepted the covenant, they went to the promised land, but they just couldn't keep the covenant, and so God had to do something different. But that's not really biblical. They were rejecting from the very beginning. They did not want to enter into the covenant relationship. Yes, there was some really devout people there, Joshua, you know, people like that were with their own heart entering in. But as a people, as a group, they were rejecting God. They never did accept it. They never did enter into the covenant. And, you know, the tables of stone were broken before Moses even got to them in the camp. They broke the covenant before it was even brought to them. They were rebellious from the very beginning. And it's not because God was asking them to do something that they couldn't do. That would be a very stern and kind of cruel God that would be asking them to do something that he knew they weren't going to be able to do. He knew it had to go to plan B. So this whole idea, which is very, very pervasive, it's all over, constantly being repeated, that they just somehow couldn't keep God's commandments. They entered in the covenant, but they just couldn't do it all. God had to come up with a different way. He's going to have Christ now, and he's going to have grace. That's not true. He always wanted to enter into this covenant, and he is going to have a people that enter in, and he's going to sanctify them through the blood of Christ for this relationship. So it's a little different way of looking at it than what we typically see, but that's what I see in the Bible. Now, it's a lot easier for us to look back and see whether they remembered or whether they didn't remember. It's harder for them at that time that this Moses was talking to them, for them to look ahead. He's kind of saying, okay, look ahead when you get into the promised land and don't forget. So in other words, they're trying to look ahead to see if they're going to remember or not. But for us, especially after thousands of years and having these words preserved in the Bible all this time, it's a lot easier for us to look back and see, did they remember? Do we remember? And I think what we're going to see when we look into this is we're going to see two things that are pretty clear. One is that the exact things that God told them, the very specific things he told them to remember, are the exact same things that are forgotten. And not just by them, not just by the Jews, but even by us today, even by Christians. They're the exact same things that God told them to remember is what we forget. And the second thing we're going to see is that God gave them not only instructions to remember, but he gave them tools. He gave them helps, guidances that would help them remember. So how important it is to remember those tools that will help us remember the other things. So we'll go through that. Now, the first mention in the Bible of remembrance is with the covenant that was made with Noah. And this is the lesson study brings us out. And that was the covenant that was made after the flood to Noah and all the creatures of the earth. And we can find that in Genesis 9:14. It says, "It shall be, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh." So here God is promising that he's not going to have flood waters anymore, and he's not going to destroy his creation. But there's something else that he promises in this. Not just that there's not going to be a flood, there's something broader that he promises in this. And this can be found just back the next chapter. So in Genesis 8. Genesis 8:20, when Noah just comes out of the ark, he builds an altar to the Lord. And it says he took of every clean animal and every clean bird, and he offered burnt offerings on the altar and sacrifice. This altar and this sacrifice with the blood were to ratify the covenant, that covenant that was symbolized in the rainbow. How do I know that? Well, in Hebrews 9:16, "For where there is a testament, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. For a testament is in force after men are dead, since it has no power at all while the testator lives. Therefore, not even the first covenant was dedicated without blood. For when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water, scarlet wool, and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, 'This is the blood of the covenant which God has commanded you.'" That's just, in Hebrews, it's just talking about what happened in Exodus. In Exodus 24, Moses told all the words that God spoke to the people, and then he wrote them all. And it says in Exodus 24:5, he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half the blood and put it in the basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, that was the words that God had spoken, and read in the hearing of the people. And he said, "All that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient." And Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you according to all these words." So that passage in Hebrews is just recalling what happened in Exodus. And that was a sacrifice that was specifically done by Moses. This wasn't part of the temple. It was even before he got instruction for the temple. This is a special sacrifice that was done to ratify this covenant. And some people don't like to use that word ratify, but I don't know what other word to use in there, but it's kind of like a sealing of the covenant. So Moses came down and he performed this. Then he goes back up and he gets the tables of stone later. But this was the procedure to ratify this covenant. And so when we read about Noah coming out and offering this sacrifice, this was to ratify this covenant that's between God and all the earth, that there would be no floodwaters. But if we read on in that Genesis 8:20 and keep going, so let me start there again and keep going and see if you can see what else was promised, not a flood. See if you can pick it up. Genesis 8:20. "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, 'I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease.'" Okay, so what is he promising? Here, which is even before Genesis 9, he is promising in this covenant, in this rainbow, is not just that there's not going to be another flood, but there's going to be seed time and harvest, the cold, heat, winter, summer, day and night. We're going to have these cycles, and we're going to have harvest. We're going to have harvest to feed us. We don't have to starve either. So in this promise is like his control of the weather. And what happened? Did they remember? Do we remember this covenant? Just think of the Tower of Babel. Obviously, they didn't remember. They were going to build this tower that was going to be to protect them in case there's another flood. So right away, they already were not remembering. But what about today? We need to look at today. So what do we do today? Well, first of all, most scientists and people that call themselves scientists deny that there was a flood. I don't understand how they can do that. Fly over the western United States and look down, and you will see massive areas of just flow, of water flow, just drainage patterns that you can see just from the airplane. So I don't know how people can deny there was a flood, but they do it. What's the second thing that they do today? Well, they desecrate the symbol. The rainbow has now been desecrated to mean something else, instead of pointing us to our Creator and the promises that he made to sustain life and to sustain us even when the imagination of man's heart is evil, because that was the whole problem. And now this symbol in a lot of cultures is come to mean something that is almost symbolic of man's evil heart. So it's really desecrated the symbol that was supposed to be there to remind us. And the third thing that we do today is there's a big worry about climate change and global warming and natural catastrophes and asteroids striking the earth and erratic weather patterns. Everybody's always worried about this weather. We're going to have this deep cold or hot heat, and everyone's always worried about it. And yet, year after year, we have enough food on this planet to feed the planet and then some. And every year, and yeah, there'll be lost crops and there'll be hard times and there'll be different things going on in different places. Some places are becoming deserts. Other places are becoming more inhabitable. There's changes. But all this is despite what man is doing to the planet and destroying the earth. God is still, he's using the weather, and he keeps it cycling and everything so that we can have the harvest. You can see that he's in control of it to keep our harvest going. And so here, when we're asked to remember this covenant that was made with us, we're denying it and we're not remembering it. And just, I'm saying that as we, as just general society and popular thought. So we can see that. And when we look at tools of remembrance and we think of what God's given us as tools to remember these things, well, we have the Sabbath is a tool of remembrance. And, you know, there's different ways that we can put things to memory. Usually when you repeat something, or if you spend a long time on things, or you do things in different environments. They tell you when you're studying for exams to kind of study in different locations. So, just having a different environment and getting that information, it gets put in different parts of your brain, and it's just easier to access that way. So the more we spend time with things, and the Sabbath is a way that we can spend time with God and remembering these things and remembering the God of creation. And so the Sabbath is not just something that's just a concept. It's actually something that you can experience and use as a tool to help us remember. And we can see that the Sabbath is a symbol of creation. So in Exodus 20:11, it says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Do we remember this today? So let's look at, just in popular thought, well, first of all, generally, there's a big portion of the population that believes in evolution, and they deny that there's a creator. They don't think that God created everything. And even among those who might believe that God created things, well, a lot of those people have changed the Sabbath to Sunday. And that has implications for the other things that the Sabbath symbolizes. And that other thing, one of them is deliverance. In Deuteronomy 5:15, we have, "And remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." So, and the Sabbath is the seventh day. It falls at the end of the week. So here we go through the labor, we go through work. And, ever since Adam, our labor has not always been all pleasant. It's nice to be employed and to have a job and be useful, but it wears on, I think, all of us. And by the end of the week, we are ready for the Sabbath. Even people who don't keep the Sabbath. Here in the United States, they say, thank God it's Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the Sabbath, even those who don't keep it. And so we have this Sabbath at the end. The deliverance comes at the end. We labor. We're in bondage. We're on this planet. We're kind of stuck on this planet of sin. We can't get off of it. We can't get away from it. And we're delivered at the end. And just think of the significance. When you keep Sunday as a religious day, you kind of negate all that. You're starting out with the deliverance. And then what are you ending up with? Then you're just going into work and just working from then on. So there's a lot of implications with keeping the first day of the week versus the last day of the week. And it's more than I think we even realize sometimes, that it's not just the very next day, it's on the weekend, but there's actually implications to what the Sabbath is meant to remind us of: creation and deliverance. And of course, the third one is sanctification. This is only found in Exodus 31:12 and 13. It says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you." That's a similar thing. When we have the Sabbath falling at the end of the week, and we keep the Sabbath diligently. A lot of people who keep Sunday, what happened over time, the early Sunday keepers kept Sunday like a Sabbath. They didn't work. They went to church and they had picnics or whatever they did, but they did not work. But now a lot of people who keep Sunday and go to church, and then they'll come home and, I don't know, maybe they'll do some errands or something. Maybe it's not their heavy work day, but they don't really keep it as set apart as most Sabbath keepers do. So there again, how can we be remembering sanctification if we're not setting apart this day as a special holy day and remembering that it's God that's the one that sanctifies us? Christ is the one who covers our sins, who cleanses us, who brings us into this relationship. So it's kind of hard to do that when you're not really keeping Sabbath or Sunday as a holy day that's set apart. So that's important. Now, Tuesday's lesson talks about taking heed lest you forget, and it also talks about teaching these to your children. So in Deuteronomy 4:9, it says, "Only take heed to yourselves." And the lesson brings up that he's saying that's a individual, like he's talking to people individually. You individually guard this. You take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And teach them to your children and your grandchildren, because they're not going to see it, right? Especially concerning the day you stood before the Lord your God in Horeb, when the Lord said to me, Gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. So he's talking about that big, massive meeting when he wanted to meet with the children of Israel directly, but they were all at the base of the mountain. They heard the thunderings. They saw the lightning. They knew Moses was going up there. And he wants them to remember that day and to teach it to their children so that they'll listen to what God said on that very day. And in Deuteronomy 6:7, these are texts that are in the lesson. It says, "You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." That's what God has spoken. Those are his commandments. Those are his statutes and his judgments. And that's repeated again in Deuteronomy 11. But in Deuteronomy 6:20, a little further on in that chapter, it says, "When your son asks you in time to come, saying, 'What is the meaning of the testimonies, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord our God has commanded you?' Then you shall say to your son, 'We were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe, against Egypt, Pharaoh, and all his household. Then he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in, to give us a land of which he swore to our fathers.' And the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. Then it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to observe all these commandments before the Lord our God, as he commanded us. Here, this is what they're remembering. They're remembering this time. And here we go again. They're remembering the deliverance from Pharaoh and all these mighty acts that God did, and that he is their God, and that he will be there and he will deliver them. And this brings us into, there's another tool of remembrance besides the weekly Sabbath. And this tool is remembrance for the children too, that you're supposed to teach the children to generations and generations. Do you know what this is? This can be found in Exodus 12:24 through 27. It says, "And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be when your children say to you, 'What do you mean by this service?' that you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the children of the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households.' And so the people bowed their heads and worshipped." So besides the weekly Sabbath, we see there was annual Sabbath days. There were special holy days and special holy times that were also to serve as this remembrance, the remembrance of the deliverance. Of course, Passover is when you remember that deliverance. But there's other annual periodic Sabbaths as well. There's the feasts, but there's also periods in there of Sabbath days, like the Day of Atonement, and even other cycles, like every 7 years at the time of Tabernacles, they were to do no other but to read aloud the book of the law. Yeah, probably Deuteronomy. It says in Deuteronomy, hopefully we'll get to this. I told you I don't look ahead in the lessons, so I don't know what exactly is out there, but I hope we get to this. Deuteronomy 31:10, and Moses commanded them, saying, "At the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time in the year of release, at the Feast of Tabernacles." So Tabernacles was the Feast of Ingathering. That was at the end of the year. And so he's saying at the end of every 7 years. So that would be those 7-year cycles when they had the sabbatical year and they let the crops remain fallow. So at the end of every 7 years, at the time of Tabernacles, so it wasn't to be done every Tabernacles, only every 7 years, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, which they did every year, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men and women and little ones, and the stranger who is within your gates, that they may hear and that they may learn to fear the Lord your God and carefully observe all the words of this law, and that their children who have not known it, because maybe they're born, maybe they're 7 years old, or maybe they're 8, maybe they were too young to hear it the first time, that their children who have known it may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land which you cross the Jordan to possess. So we can see that God has given us the weekly Sabbath, and he's also given these periodic annual Sabbaths and times to use to remember not just that he brought them out of the land of Egypt, but that he is our God, that he is our God, that he has these laws, that he wants us to enter into covenant relationships so he can write those laws on our hearts, so he can teach us how to live, not just for this life, for his kingdom. He wants us to be in his kingdom with him, and this is how his kingdom operates. You know, there's 2 main ways I think that memory can be lost. And one of those is if we don't keep something in the forefront. You know, say you have tools that you never use and they just end up buried in your garage. And then when you need that tool, you don't even know where to look. You can't retrieve it. Memory is kind of like that. If we have things in our memory that are just not, we just put them away. We just don't think about them. We just kind of forget about them. Other stuff comes in and kind of gets to the forefront, and it's hard to go retrieve that information. But if we're constantly thinking about something, whether it's things that we have to memorize for school or for work or anything like that, we constantly go over it in different settings, like I said, in different environments, and we attack it from different angles, and we ask questions about it, and we talk about it, and we keep it in our memory. Then it's hard to forget it because it's always in that forefront. It's up in the front. So that's one way that memory can kind of be buried. It can be buried by not using it and not keeping it at the forefront. The other way, and this kind of comes in with, you can see it in with computers, is it can be overwritten. And that's what happens when we overwrite the truth with something else. And that something else is so strong because it's there now, it's fresh, and it's overwritten. So anytime we try to retrieve that memory in that spot, it gets substituted with something else. And I think a lot of that is what happens today. We have a lot of things that come into our memory that overwrite what God has said, and we've heard them so many times, and they just appear there. Like, I think a lot of people, well, I'm not going to say a lot of people, but a lot of Christians, they kind of have a negative view of the Sabbath, of the seventh-day Sabbath. They hear that and they think, oh, legalism or something like that. And the same thing is kind of happening with the feast days. These are things that God gave us. He gave us not only as important times to meet with Him and to meet with each other and to worship together corporately, but He also gave them as tools to remember Him and to remember all the words that He spoke. And so when we see that there's a lack of appreciation for these words that were spoken, we hear, well, these were all nailed to the cross, or they're just for the Jews, or, well, these don't pertain to us anymore. We don't have oxen that are goring another person. But it's important. These things are important. God wouldn't have spoken them, and He wouldn't have preserved them. All these other things that come in overwrite them. You know, when it says in Deuteronomy 8, it says, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping His commandments, His judgments, and His statutes, which I command you today. So see, even in keeping His commandments, His statutes, and His judgments, even if we don't know exactly how to keep them, but we try to keep them, just in keeping them, it helps us to remember. So it's not just remembering to keep His commandments, but it's in keeping His commandments helps us remember Him. You know, when the lesson says, and I'll read this verbatim, it says, whether Jews in the wilderness, Christians in Ephesus, or Seventh-day Adventists anywhere in the world, how crucial is it for us always to remember and not forget what God has done for us in Christ. And I would ask, what better way is there to remember God and Christ, and to even understand what Christ has done, than to not only keep the weekly Sabbath, but these annual Sabbaths and these special holy days? The Jews in the wilderness did that. Christ did that. The apostles and the early Christians did this. Paul was scrambling to get to places to keep the feasts. And these are special days. And what's happened, I fear, is that these special meeting times of God have gotten a bad name, and they've also been overridden. They've been overridden with our traditional holidays, and this is really prevalent, especially in the United States. There's some holiday traditions around Christmas that run really deep in people, and it's just really hard for them to let go of those. And so what they're doing is they're overriding, they're taking the place of what has been given to us by God as special times to remember Him. I kind of look at it as we get so much worship energy. You know, that worship energy is supposed to go to God, and it's supposed to go to God on His times and in His places. And anytime we're spending any kind of energy, and maybe it's just hanging a wreath on the door or something, I mean, I don't want to get nitpicky, but just anything that's taking our holiday energy and it's misplacing it into holidays that are not biblical and that are really sanitized pagan holidays, which you cannot sanitize them. Anything we do is taking it away from God. That is a form of idolatry. And I believe that the way that we can remember God and to even understand what Christ has done for us, to understand his atonement, is by observing the times that God has told us to observe. Not just the seventh-day Sabbath, but these other Sabbaths as well. They're in right along with the seventh day. And it's really a good thing that the Adventists have found the seventh-day Sabbath, because it opens the door to these other feasts that are also times to meet with God. And I think we're going to see this in Deuteronomy. If we, hopefully in the next few lessons, there's going to be one that we're going to discover what happened when they found the book of the law. Because there was periods in the history of the Jews that they lost the law. They lost the book of the law, and they found it. And there's two incidences in particular, and I'm not going to go into those in detail, because hopefully we will get to them before this quarter is over. This is just a sneak preview of what's to come. But in 2 Kings, when Hezekiah the high priest says to the scribe, I found the book of the law in the house of the Lord, he gives it to the scribe to read. And when he hears it, he tears his clothes. And what does he do? He makes a covenant before God to follow the Lord, to keep his commandments, his testimonies, and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to perform the words of the covenant that were written in the book. And all the people at that time take a stand for the covenant. There's a revival. And what does the king, command the people? He says, keep the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. Such a Passover surely has never been held since the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was held before the Lord in Jerusalem. So they had discovered the book of the law, and they said, hey, what did they find in there? They found the feast. They found the Passover. They said, hey, we should be keeping this. And they kept it. For the first time in a long time. And there's another revival that happens that's very, very similar. That happens in Nehemiah. We can find that in Nehemiah 8. And that's when Ezra the scribe, if you remember, brings the book of the law, and he starts reading it before the people. And they found written in the book of the law, this is in Nehemiah 8:14, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths during the feast of the 7th month. So that's the tabernacles, that's the dwelling in booths. And they discover that, and they say, hey, we should be doing this. We should. So they also have a revival at this time, discovering that, hey, we haven't been keeping these feasts. And they start keeping them. So we can see that what is happening when you read the book of the law, you start discovering these things. And there are things that help us to remember, and they help us to come closer to God, and they help us to understand his plan of salvation for us. They help us understand atonement. They help us understand the New Testament. And so they're very, very vital and critical for us to understand. So how can we not forget? By using the tools and engaging in these practices, because it's not just knowing about them. When you do things, the more you engage with something, the better your memory gets. The more you interact. So it's not just an acknowledgement, oh yeah, I know the Sabbath's there, but we enter into the Sabbath, right? Every week, we don't just say, yeah, I guess it's the 7th day, yeah, it's a holy day. We do things different. We enter into it. We prepare for it. We enjoy it. It's a separate day that we enter into. And it's the same thing with the feasts. Just knowing about them and understanding about them is not enough. You really need to experience them. And I hope that this study in Deuteronomy will really inspire you to look closer at this topic. And if anyone feels uncomfortable with this, write to me at sabbathschoolgems@gmail.com and let me know. I am searching the scriptures, and this is what I found. And I have been blessed by it. And I know that there's a lot of negativity regarding the feasts from pastors out there. And I just really think that we should take this with prayer, especially as we're coming up on these holidays that are not biblical holidays. How much time and energy are we going to be putting into these that then will discourage us from keeping these other times, the ones that God has told us not to forget, and that will help us to remember other things about him and to come closer to him. So I think this was a really important lesson, and I hope you got something out of it. And like I said, feel free to write to me. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this subject. And until next time, bye for now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Sabbath School Gems. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word to others. Comments and questions can be sent to us at sabbathschoolgems@gmail.com. Bye for now.